It's a rookie move to think that you know it all about energy drinks if you've only had the usual crap in a can, you know, the stuff that makes you go up and then crash back down. Unlike a lot of people in this business taking a paycheck, I'm no faker when it comes to this shit. Though I am faker when it comes to being the greatest, and not only my own content, but promoting the best brands. And so I'm not going to be the shy one when it comes to making the case for gamer subs as the best out there. Tastes great and not really chemically.
When I first tried it, I was IG. Instantly glad.
You get 100 servings in this little pot, so no filler. And you can get 10% off your order by using the code Thorin at gamersubs.gg. This will not lead to instances of negative gaming. Before we can have a discussion about the case for Rookie as the greatest player of all time in League of Legends, we need to ask, why is it even a big deal to propose that Rookie could be? Because let's be real, a lot of people are going to take accomplishments and decide that's what's going to allow you to be the greatest player ever. And essentially, accomplishments are stats. They are curated pieces of information selected to try and help us judge between things, draw implications, figure out patterns, etc. Now, I did a video about stats. It was mainly about CSGO, but it was about the fact that a good discussion that involves stats begins with a stat and then uses expert knowledge, context, like study of the different areas, contrast, to figure out what the stat could be telling us, or rather, if it confirms something else that we think already. In that scenario, if stats were just facts, like if you just said someone who's won 5 world championships must be the best because that's the most world championships ever, no one's done it in League of Legends, then in that scenario, without context, remember, you won't be able to add any context because that's going to be different from just taking the stat. You now have to count someone like Bengi as significantly greater than Mata, Rookie, Smeb, Perks, Uzi, because he's won more world championships. You'd have to count Wolf as greater than all those people I've just listed before. So the point isn't just that Faker won the world championship, it's that he was the primary more aspect of winning the championship. He was the most influential player, the most influential role in the team. In that meta, it's other factors. The stat is only where you begin this conversation, so stats alone can't determine it. Now, I understand why Faker is the consensus pick for the greatest of all time, the GOAT. And by the way, by a country mile. Because he basically has everything going for him. But actually, one reason I think why is because the start of his career was so exceptional that I don't think basically that the rest of his career, even when it hasn't lived up to that always, has ever come out of the shadow of how exceptional it was. And so anytime he wins again, in people's minds, it instantly reconnects them to prime Season 3, Season 5 Faker, maybe even some of the heroics of Season 7. And they instantly think like, well, like another championship for the GOAT. That just proves he's the GOAT even more. Even sometimes when later championships actually aren't about him necessarily being the GOAT. So I think there's actually an inertia, a momentum coming from the beginning of his career that was so exceptional. That means people won't even consider this discussion. But as you'll see when I start getting into it, I think there's a lot more that can be said for it. And I plan to actually potentially do a series where I make the case for some other people potentially being the GOAT. Even though, at the end of it all, yeah, spoiler, I still pick Faker because he really has every metric overall, except for a couple that you might see later in this particular video. So one of the reasons why you've got a pretty good case to make for Faker is just look at the first year or so. I mean, the OGN Winter Final took place like at the latter part of January 2014. So Faker begins his career in the spring season of 2013 in OGN Champions, later to become LCK. And he ends up winning, if you count into the beginning of the next year, 2 domestic championships out of 3 he plays in. He made the semis of the other one, and Worlds as well, and was clearly the best player in all of those tournaments, all 4 of them, including the one he made the semis of, and all the wins and all the championships. So already, that's like something that most people in history can barely compare to in terms of accomplishments. Worlds and 2 domestic splits. That's already like the best accomplishments of other people, but obviously that isn't your entire resume. He had arguably the highest skill peak the same year, Season 3, and that is indelibly burned into our minds how exceptional he was, even from his first 2 or 3 games in OGN Champions. He reinvented himself many, many times. One of the most impressive things I think a great player has to do. LeBron had to do it. Tom Brady had to do it. Peyton Manning had to do it. All the great players have to do it. So you look at how he changed when he was in Season 5, where now he was this like pressure vacuum god who it was almost like an invisible impact that he had on the map, not necessarily just the outplays and the kills. Season 6, an exceptional player still in a well-rounded squad and able to overcome as part of a team
Then you had Season 7 where he wasn't in his best individual form, but he had to hard carry and then on off-meta champions, or maybe not off-meta, off-carry champions. How about that? He was carrying from a utility style of play, but still having insane impact on the map. Season 9, at this point in time, he's just a good mid laner. He's not even close, in my opinion, to the best Korean mid laner. And actually, I don't think, quite frankly, that those championships count necessarily as him being the best. So I even think that's overrated. In fact, that's another aspect of Faker being the greatest, right? Is the idea that he was always the best player on his team. Now, people will debate that for certain tournaments, but if you look at the through line through to, say, the end of Season 7, yeah, he largely was the best player, pretty much always on his team. And if his team was the best in the world, it meant he was the de facto number one player in the world by most people's way of judging it. I don't always go that way. Like, I thought Knight was the best player in the world this year, whether his team was the best or not. But you look at Season 8, Season 9, it's debatable if he's the best player in his team anymore. Then consider this. He was obviously incredibly influential in his role. I mean, how aggressive he played, people basically echoed that many, many years beyond that. A lot of great mid laners wanted to be super aggressive. Then, obviously, the way he would roam, the way he would use his jungler, how influential he was over how you build a team around him. I mean, he's probably got the most successful blueprint ever for how you can build a squad again and again around him to win the championship that no other player in any other region can really fuck with. Like, other people have had to do very different styles. I'd even say, if you want to see how influential he is, I'm going to make a video on it coming up soon, but some of the doper stuff, Apto, where he references how Faker's map movements set up ganks or bait someone into positions where they can be killed or overload them with attention. That even shows that, quite frankly, Bengi and Koma's contribution to Faker's success was actually overrated, in my opinion. I always thought Koma was overrated anyway because he had the greatest player ever and tons of chances to retool player after player after player. I'm sure he was a good coach, but the greatest coach, I have my suspicions he's probably not. I personally think he's probably among the overrated coaches. I mean, Perks just recently in a Croatian podcast himself even just basically said he still thinks like coaches are largely useless in the game. Like, in general, they are assistants to the great players, in my opinion. Not many of them are real masterminds in their own right. In fact, the closest I thought the Koreans ever had to that was Nofe, actually. And even then he had his own failings. Maybe he had his own aspects like Reaper does, where he has his own genius, but he has his own flaws that stop him from winning many times. For me, actually, the only coach I've ever seen in Asian League of Legends that I thought really encapsulated some element of genius was actually Aaron, the guy who was behind the WE dynasty in late Season 2, early Season 3. Then later he was with EDG for many years when they were champions and retooled his star players over and over again. I thought this guy had a very shrewd understanding of the game, and in my opinion, was the real lever on which the LPL turned from being the second or third best region to becoming the best region overall and having these teams that could finally beat the Korean teams, even though it was rarely his teams that actually were the ones that were able to go ahead and do it. I think in terms of Faker's longevity, obviously, again, that seems impossible. He was so good for so many of the first few years and at such a high level, it just made it seem like no one would ever overcome him. But, and this is the point of the video, as well as to now talk about Rookie, is that a lot of these things have been set in stone and are just, as a result, never questioned. They never go back and think, was he always the best player on his team? What was the context of the meta he played in? Like, has anyone else actually beaten him out for these years or had as good a skill peak? So, for example, as I mentioned before, Faker's accomplishment list basically already put him out of range, if you're going by accomplishments, of everyone else, like 3 years in. 3 years in, he'd won 4 LCK titles, LCK OGN champions, 2 Worlds, and 1 MSI if you count All-Stars as the precursor to MSI. That already is like better than any rival he's ever going to have on one of these lists, quite frankly. No one's going to be able to match that haul, the variety of that haul, and basically winning everything that matters overall in terms of the biggest titles of your career. So if you go primarily off accomplishments, like a lot of people do, you're just going to stop the discussion, say, I've made my mind up, I don't need to hear any more. Now, if you want to go off the team game, that's always also an interesting angle, in my opinion. Because remember, this isn't a 1v1 game. It's not tennis. Like in tennis, you even have to ask what was the context of the era they won in, what was the style, what were the surfaces like, who did they play, what was the bracket like. But in this scenario, this is a pure team game. It's a 5v5 game. So you have to ask yourself, what region did someone play in? What organisation did they play for? Did they have money to get them players? Were they good at getting them players? Were they good at building around them, at hiring good coaching staff? Who was the coaching staff that they had in charge of what they might be picking or how their teammates play and practice? Who were those teammates? How good were they? Were they just decent? Were they made better by this player? Were they already great players? Then you have to even throw in things like what the meta was, what specific champions got buffed and nerfed. These are all things that are going to determine how good you are. And by the way, Faker doesn't get to decide what Riot changes in that regard. That's why he had split switch where maybe he wasn't the absolute best player. I'm sure some of his champions or the meta got nerfed in a way that didn't always fit him. It's not the case that everyone can just adapt like people try to pretend. I think often the opposite, and it's just people looking for patterns. That means they just ignore that and say whoever won must have adapted and therefore was the best. Like, there's plenty of seasons where FPX would have come nowhere near to winning Worlds. But in Season 9 at Worlds, things were fucking awesome. Pretty much couldn't have asked for them to be better, could you? Even the context of the teams they ended up playing. So I, spoiler, would have Faker as my GOAT. But not primarily for the titles. The titles, listen, if you want to do a tiebreaker, they're the ultimate tiebreaker, right? But I actually think the titles, in their rightful place, are byproducts of the greatness of Faker and some of the influence he had outside of even just being a mid lane, like how he worked with the jungler, how his team was able to build around him, how he could absorb pressure despite being, in theory, the role that should have the most focus in the game. There was all these other factors. This is part of why, in my opinion, sometimes he had teammates that weren't actually that great, but they got to win and be champions and get overrated because they played with Faker. And you know what? He also had luck, because everyone has luck. Now, I think when you say luck, that's part of the problem. That immediately triggers people's minds with the fucking programming from society. If instead you say he took more advantage of the opportunities that came his way and he created more opportunities, in part due to being a great player, but also part of people wanting to help him as a great player, wanting to play with him, wanting to coach him, wanting to rebuild around him. And all the greatest champions in history need that. Tom Brady, Michael Jordan, these guys didn't do it on their own. Nobody does it on their own. Like, Tom Brady had arguably the best coach ever, who also was his GM. Now go find me one of his rival quarterbacks who even has anything comparable to that. How about all the good defenses that Tom Brady had? He didn't fucking play defense in the same way as Faker doesn't play bot lane. Faker doesn't play top lane. It doesn't matter how good he is. If you put average players or below average players in those positions for the region, he is not going to win. That is just reality. It's one of the reasons I actually think Smeb's career is mad underrated, because I think he had some good teammates and I think he had some atrocious or average teammates, and yet almost accomplished Faker-esque feats with, in my opinion, lesser talents overall for most of his career, beyond when he got to the super team, obviously, which had their own failures. Same with Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan had Phil Jackson, arguably the best coach ever, and specifically for man management, what you need with superstars like Michael Jordan and the other big egos in the team. Then consider the drafting around Michael Jordan. He was given Scottie Pippen, he was given Dennis Rodman. That had nothing to do with him. You can say, yeah, but he worked with Scottie Pippen. Yeah, sure. And you know what? Scottie Pippen did a fucking amazing job defending some of those players that everyone pretends it was Michael Jordan defending at all times. He didn't. Like Kobe, he would switch off late in a game to cover someone for certain key stretches, but otherwise he had other guys helping guard those guys. Dennis Rodman had fuck all to do with Michael Jordan. He was already at his peak, arguably, before the Bulls. And what a game changer. That's genius from the GMs, by the way, that they brought in the best rebounder who has no interest in scoring to give the ball back to the greatest player ever when he misses a shot. In hindsight, it seems obvious that's amazing, but you had to have the right coach to make it work with him. You had to understand how to control this guy's ego and where he was at emotionally. Like, it wasn't as simple as it seems. And Michael Jordan didn't do all these things. He did some of them and he had his impact, but other people played a pivotal role. So if you think that you can just be a great individual player and all these things will happen for you automatically, just go ask Dominique Wilkins or Charles Barkley about being really, really good at your role, arguably as good as it's possible to be, but just not getting the right talent, not being in the right org, not being in the right period of time, having the wrong opponent be in your way at the wrong time. Like, these things can fuck everything up for you. Greatness individually, on the part of Faker, as I referenced earlier, unfortunately, has that inertia still carrying on from his peak years and the accomplishments that he managed. Now, I could argue he wasn't the best mid in the world for Season 7, Season 8, Season 9, Season 10. So basically, up to the end of Season 6, we don't even need to have the individual discussion anymore. If anyone else has 2 or 3 years out of a 3 to 4 year span, they've already beaten him. If someone has like 3 to 4 years, or 4 maybe, 4 or 5, they've already beaten him. So this is the interesting detail that we're going to get into now. In most of those years I just referenced, I think he convincingly wasn't the best player. And yet, in the period I'm talking about now, Season 7 to Season 10, he won 4 LCK titles, an MSI, he made a Worlds final and another Worlds semi-final. So clearly accomplishment alone don't do it, because that alone's an amazing accomplishment list, but it wasn't when he was the best player in the world. So even, and by the way, even though he won a whole bunch of championships domestically in Season 9, Season 10, I don't think he was even the best player on his team. Like, I think you go look at those teams, depending on what period of time we're talking about, maybe Teddy is the best player. Like, there's cases you can make for others in that lineup. Now, for me, the conversation gets even more interesting when you actually consider who can best Faker in other factors. Like, who has more peak years than Faker? You're probably going to go, no one, but stop reacting emotionally and think about it. Who's had more hard carry years? Who had a more difficult task of trying to win and trying to make his team successful? Who played in a more difficult field or region? So let's start just with Rookie's accomplishments, right? This guy's won the LPL twice. He's been in many LPL finals. He's won Worlds once. He's been in another World semi. I won't say the MSI semi because it's not really that big a deal. If you come from LPL, you're basically supposed to at least make the semi if you go there. Now, Rookie himself didn't have that crazy inertia and momentum at the beginning of his career because his first big moment was obviously the fluke win in OGN Champions Summer in 2014 with KT Arrows, KTA as they might be called. Now, at that time, Cacao was the bigger name and was a monster carry jungler and was super influential over the style. And so even though, and by the way, also Someday was no joke, he was certainly a very competent player. So the issue here is he was still a developing talent and he wasn't the clear-cut reason that they won and he wasn't a hard carry in the same way that Faker was, and it was Season 4, it wasn't Season 3. Even Faker wasn't monster stomping people in Season 4. Season 4 was a pretty boring mid-lane meta. So then he goes to the LPL. Well, already that was kind of seen as a knock against Rookie because it was initially viewed as that's an easier route to get championships and you've just gone there for money. I mean, think about some of the people who won over there. Koreans like Deft and Imp won immediately the first year they went there on Chinese teams. People like eventually Mata and Mystic and Scout all won the LPL when they weren't considered the best at their role in sometimes the LPL, sometimes the entire world, and definitely not compared to the best Koreans. So to LCK and Korean fans, they probably looked at the LPL and thought it's a slightly easier league in the same way as people who are from LEC don't view winning LCS as being as significant. They think it's an easier league overall. Now, my issue with that is, in terms of the overall field, the entire league and the strength, the average strength of the teams, I think the LPL has been harder in terms of field for every year since the LCK began. Season 5 onwards. LCK has had some amazing elite teams and some of the best teams in the world, but in terms of the field from like 1 to 6, 1 to 8, 1 to 10, the LPL's been way better because you had the career exodus of talent go to the LPL. You had a mass of LPL talent swell into the league. You had tons of competition right down to the last playoff spots every single year, often to even make the playoffs. Can actually have some pretty quality teams that could go on a fluke run through the regional and go to Worlds. The absolute elite teams, I'll give you, for most of history, haven't been as good as the LCK. Except for this year, I might have even argued every year I thought the LCK's top 2 teams were usually better overall than the top 2 from the LPL. But the number of top teams in terms of difficulty, in one sense, can be out having rare elite teams though. Because the rare elite teams, in theory, have an easier time getting deep in the tournament and facing each other. And so if unfortunately you're Smeb and you're on Rocks Tigers and you're always going to face Faker's SKT, then your problem is you have to beat Faker's SKT. I know one time he didn't have to because KT did him a favour. But if you're in the LPL or a region with tons of really good teams, but not necessarily all the elite teams in most of history, these bracket matchups can go crazy all over the place and stop you winning, even if you're in the best, the second, the third best team, because the parity's so crazy. So actually, it's really difficult. I mean, think of what happened to Rookie himself. He was in a team, an underdog, that upset the Samsung Blue team. Well, imagine that there was loads of teams that had the upset potential like that. That's what the LPL has been for a long time. Then you look individually, he has been the dominant individual force in the LPL from Season 6 onwards for my money. Now, certainly at times, and with the right lineups, the Shy on his team, Uzi I on RNG, Deft on EDG. They've been rivals in that respect. They've been as good as him at certain points of time, maybe better for certain splits. But over that period of time, he is the one connecting factor from, I would say, Season 6 through to now in the LPL. I think the only player outside of the ones I've listed who even should be in the conversation is Mata, and that's largely in terms of how he controlled his team style, potentially I'd say in recruiting, and influenced the way his team played. He is the only persistent figure, and he has done what Faker did for many years in the LCK, but in the LPL, it's just that because a lot of people don't watch LPL, even people who watch LCK, they just might not be aware of that. And they might think because he didn't go to Worlds, he wasn't the best, or he wasn't hard carrying, or he wasn't good enough, or whatever it might be. I actually even think, and this is one of the reasons I made this video, he's actually done what Faker did in the LCK for longer and with more consistency over in the LPL. For my money, from Season 6 to Season 10, I'm not even including Season 5, he has been arguably the best mid laner. Maybe Knight took that title for a brief period of time. I would say overall he did. But even then, that's like you're the number 2 mid laner in the world then. for that many years. That is unbelievable. And that's with a bunch of different pieces coming in and out of you. In fact, every single role being swapped around over that span of time, sometimes for good, sometimes for ill. Then you look internationally, yeah, you know what? Season 5 Worlds sucked for the whole team, quite frankly. The entire team collapsed. They were in a group they should have gotten out of. Cacao was an absolute shitter, sadly. And Rookie, I don't think played great. But then again, I also think he had his issues other than that. Season 8 Worlds, he was too good. Like, I actually think... I know they gave the MVP to Ning because of the way that like the jungle meta affected that tournament, but I thought the Shy could have won it and Rookie should have won it, and I actually think they were much better candidates. Like the way he treated Perks in that semi was fucking unbelievable. And let's not even talk about Caps. He just took Caps and Perks and smacked them around, boys. He was unbelievable. Season 9 Worlds, he almost took a broken team to the final of the tournament. Then in Season 10, he was probably the best mid in the LPL at moments, depending on how much you like Knight. And if you don't like Knight, you can easily just say it was Rookie. I don't care that he didn't qualify for Worlds. In the summer, at least, he was absolutely on fire again, hard carrying them. In the spring, yeah, I'll give it to Knight. And I think Knight overall over the year gets it, 'cause I think he's the best player in the world, although I certainly have my questions about what he did at Worlds. Season 9 in MSI, in the group stage, he was banging. Yes, he had his issues in the semis. He still had one super hard carry game that was fucking banging, but the rest of the series, I thought he had his issues. So, okay, in terms of the overall body of work, a lot of this is domestic, right? But let's look at the era as well, because they're also not playing the same game at the same time. Faker's best years are Season 3 and Season 5. Season 7 was impressive for other external context, right? Season 3 was playing Zed when it was mad OP, Old LeBlanc, one of the most OP champions ever when you consider how they nerfed it, they still kept getting played, and Deathfire Grasp item Ari. Now, you can hard carry on shit like that in a way you will never be able to again in League of Legends. And that was Season 3. It's done now. You're never going to be able to go back to that. Also, your jungler could have unlimited wards. So any advantages you got, you could just compound. And you had the pick comp power that could just devastate the map. In general, people were way looser with their map movements. They didn't have the Season 4 understanding of how to split the map and how to use it was the new ward system at that point in time, coming from people like Samsung. So as a result, like, it's a different game you were playing back then. This is like in the old days, where I'm not going to be one of those people who says like sports were easier, but certain elements of them were, because certain defensive schemes weren't understood in the same way. People didn't know the flow chart. The great players hadn't come to essentially force us to adapt to them and figure out how to some degree contain them. You can never stop them, but contain them a little bit. In Season 5, I mean, I think he was the best player on SKT, but other people say the MVP was Marin. They gave it to him for Worlds, right? He has the MVP as his top laner. Okay, maybe the Shy was that on Rookie's team, but Rookie was equally as good, if not better, for most of the time they were playing together. Also, Faker had stable bot lane. In my opinion, Bang and Wolf were kind of the poor man's Prey and Gorilla, although Prey and Gorilla certainly had their issues in some finals, just in terms of resume of the career. I don't think for his entire career, Rookie had that level of talent in the bot lane. Like, Jackie Love's incredible, but he only had Jackie Love for a couple of years. And a young Jackie Love, a very, very raw one. And then he had fucking Baolan. So let's look at Rookie, right? Rookie's prime comes after that, when in theory it's already harder to solo carry. And we're actually deep, balls deep into the Korean Vision meta, where it's not at all about just individual outplays. So we're talking Season 6 to Season 7. He was absurdly good, very, very good. But he had some whack junglers. You probably couldn't even name some of his junglers he had over the years. He had some whack bot lanes before he got Jackie Love. Even then, even when he won Worlds, he had a whack support, in my opinion, in terms of Baolan. Had no business being on that team. And yet he won Worlds with him. He made semis the next year. Give him the same tools Faker had, and then let's have a fair contest, right? Let's see what he could do. Because I don't even need that. I don't actually need you to do that thought exercise. He already, with my eye test and what I've seen of his career, has done an incredible job individually. Season 8 to Season 10, I think he might have had one bad split ever. Maybe two. Maybe I'll say like Season 9 summer, and then maybe parts of spring for this year. That's about it, though. Aside from that, he was an absolute monster in an incredibly talent-stacked region. You even think of influence he's had on the game. So you think of Faker, and you think in the old days of Orianna, you don't really now. You think of obviously Zed, but that was actually kind of overblown. But you think more of like his Rise. You think of these sorts of champions, even as Azir eventually. Think of these champions, and it's Rookie that comes to mind. Orianna. That's the greatest Oriana player ever, rookie. Syndra, rookie immediately. What an unbelievable player. Jace mid lane. I've got to go immediately to rookie again. Like, he is so good. Think about champion like Oriana. That's supposed to be the basic bitch safe mid laner. And he played it like it was one of the mid champions that could just take over the game and dominate hard. Always win lane and phase. Always be mega in team fights. Be sick in skirmishes. Play aggressively. Flash in. Make people follow you up. Like, this guy's unbelievable in what he was able to do with his career. I think personally, Faker had way more help in his career. Like, I think he had some players that were actually underrated while they played with him. I think from what we've seen since, actually Impact was probably slightly underrated, even though I know at the time people were trying to say he's the best top lane. He wasn't. Like, at that point in time, it was Flame. For a split, it was Save. I think I don't really know if Acorn deserves it, because I personally never thought if you're like the supportive top laner, you should actually be allowed to be called the best, because by definition your team isn't using you like you're the best top laner. I think Bengi was overrated, but I think Piglet was actually underrated for how good he was in Season 3. I know that he's not as good as Piglet thinks he is, but he was an extremely good AD carry, very, very hard carry player at the time. I think Marin was a little bit overrated, but Clay was very good and had a lot of influence over how the team played. I think Duke was probably underrated for his hybrid carry / supportive style. I think Khan was overrated, but a lot of people called him one of the more skilled top laners, certainly was. Peanut was probably slightly overrated, but was considered one of the best junglers. Teddy, I don't think he even was overrated. He was just the best AD carry. It's just that he was more within the ruler, boring style of AD carry, as opposed to the Uzi Eye, Jackie Love hard carry AD carry style. And I think Mata, I thought he was a little bit washed by the time he got to SKT, but as a captain, probably at his peak in terms of understanding of the game, all the experience he had, all the different teams he'd played in. I'm sure that's not a joke to get a player like that in your team when you're reformulating entirely. Then you go and look at who Rookie had. So he had the Shy, I think maybe the best top laner ever. So yeah, that's a big one. He had Jackie Love, a very strong AD carry, but with, I would say, kind of walking the line between genius in his playing style and being incredibly flawed in inting the whole game. And certainly had to be carried at times. I think Ning doesn't even deserve to be considered a truly great player. I know his accomplishments are excellent, but I don't think he's on the level of the greatest Korean junglers. I think without the Shy and Rookie, he actually would have struggled a lot. I mean, who else even is there at that point in time? And let's be real, it's not like Rookie was going around. After he went to IG, just like Faker, he stayed in one place and they've built around him again and again. It's just that they didn't build around him as well as they did around Faker. And by the way, probably even by the end had comparable amounts of money, even though early on that side goes over to the side of Rookie. It's just that they had stupider people doing the building. I mean, one factor I've actually always enjoyed in other sports when you have these GOAT debates I think people should use is look at the number of All-Star and Hall of Fame teammates that those guys played with. Now, sure, to some degree, if you're really great, you might help some of those people become All-Stars. That's certainly something, like team record will. But as a general metric, you'll see when you do that certain players are mad overrated and certain players are mad underrated. So in this regard, I think actually this helps Rookie's case much more than it makes Faker's. Like, there's that great stat that you can use if you want to do the Rodgers versus other great quarterbacks debate, which is, I think there was some stat that said something like he'd only thrown a touchdown to one player or receiver that was drafted in the first round. Now, you contrast that against some of the other great quarterbacks in history. They've had some bangers on their teams. So the key thing for me is I've made all these different contextual cases, but just the eye test. As an individual player, I think Rookie has had arguably more hard carry peak career years than even Faker did. And that's one area I never thought anyone would be able to overtake Faker, but I think this guy has. I mean, I think there's players and other players can make this, players in other positions can make the same case. It's just that they didn't play mid lane, so it's hard to be as influential on the game and as key to your team's success. So for me, individually, Faker and Rookie are 1A and 1B for mids and probably the greatest players to ever play League of Legends. In the same way as for Europe, Perks and Caps are 1A and 1B, and for North America, if you want to go for all players, it's Bjergsen and Doublelift, but in terms of mid lanes, it's Bjergsen and Jensen are the 1A, 1B. And you know what, if we want to expand it to players in general, yes, people like Uzi Eye and Deft and maybe even Mata can start to join this conversation, but with different context. This guy, Rookie, can do it just with what he did inside the server and with what your eyes as an expert can tell you about the way he played. He was a fucking incredible player. If you want to call him the greatest ever on that metric alone, I wouldn't blame you. This video was kindly supported by Lager15, Pronogo, Mohammed Alabdul Razzaq, Dean Tanglis, Animosity, ErikHillestad, Andreas Kroknes, Hades, Jensen Goh, Zoomba, JDubs, Tobias Bernasconi, Alexander Rao, and as always, a special thanks goes out to Jerky's Minion. Would you like to suggest a topic or a guest for my content? Do you want to ask me a question in one of those monthly AMAs I do? Would you like teasers for who's going to appear next on my content? Or would you even like to take part in one of those crazy donator discussions I do where we go all over the place? Well, if so, put your money where your mouth is and join the Scrolluminati today at the Patreon link in the description box below.